Some things in life you think are sacred. My engagement ring was one of them. It was not just any ring, it was my grandmother's wartime vintage piece that Marcus had gotten resized after 3 years of dating. When he proposed last spring in our favorite Austin coffee shop, I thought my heart would burst with joy. My family welcomed Marcus with open arms, and we were planning our spring wedding with such care and excitement. I trusted my family completely, especially my 22-year-old sister Madison. I never imagined that the person closest to me would be the one to shatter that trust completely. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button if you believe in sisterly bonds, and subscribe to hear more real-life stories. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty forever. I work as a marketing coordinator here in Austin, Texas, and Marcus and I share a cozy condo downtown. Madison had just graduated from college and was still living with our parents back in our hometown, about 2 hours away. Our dad works as an insurance agent, and Mom is a school administrator. We have always been a solid middle-class family, and Madison and I grew up incredibly close. I was the protective older sister who shared everything with her, from clothes to secrets to dreams about our futures. Madison had been dating Jake for about 3 months, and she was head over heels. Jake seemed nice enough when I met him, though something about his eagerness to impress everyone felt a bit forced. Madison was constantly stressed because Jake had not mentioned anything about commitment, while many of her college friends were getting engaged. She felt left behind and kept asking me for advice about their relationship. That weekend in late October, Marcus and I drove home to visit my parents. We were planning to finalize some wedding details and spend quality time with family. I was so excited to show Mom the wedding dress samples I had picked out, and Madison seemed genuinely thrilled to help with the planning. That Saturday evening, after a wonderful family dinner, I went up to my old bedroom to shower before bed. I carefully placed my engagement ring on the nightstand, something I had done hundreds of times before, without a second thought. The next morning, my world turned upside down. I reached for my ring to put it back on, and it was gone. I stared at the empty nightstand in complete disbelief, thinking maybe I had moved it somewhere else in my sleepy state. I searched through my purse, checked the bathroom counter, looked under the bed, but there was nothing. My heart started racing as the reality hit me that my precious ring was missing. Madison came running when she heard me frantically searching, and she looked genuinely worried when I explained what happened. She immediately started helping me look, checking every corner of the room, and even suggesting that maybe it had fallen behind the radiator when I was getting ready for bed. Her concern seemed so real that I felt guilty for the tiny doubt that flickered in my mind when I noticed she avoided making direct eye contact while we searched. My parents joined the search efforts, and soon our entire house was turned upside down. Dad even moved furniture to check if the ring had somehow rolled under something heavy. Mom was nearly in tears, knowing how much that ring meant to me, both financially and sentimentally. Madison suggested calling our insurance company to report the loss, but I hesitated because the ring's emotional value could never be replaced regardless of any insurance payout. As the day wore on and we found nothing, I started feeling a cold dread settling in my stomach. Madison kept offering helpful suggestions and seemed just as devastated as I was, but something felt off. She kept suggesting places the ring might be that did not make logical sense, and when I mentioned calling the police to file a report, she quickly changed the subject to insurance procedures instead. That evening, as Marcus and I drove back to Austin, empty-handed and heartbroken, I could not shake the feeling that Madison knew more than she was letting on. I tried to push those thoughts away because she was my sister, my best friend, and the idea that she could be involved was too painful to consider seriously. The next few days in Austin were torture. Marcus was incredibly supportive, but I could see how stressed he was about the missing ring too. It had taken him months to save up for it, and knowing how much my grandmother's ring meant to me, he was devastated that it was gone. We called our insurance company, and they explained that for an heirloom piece like mine, we would need to file a police report and provide documentation of the ring's history and value. I decided to drive back home that weekend to handle the paperwork and continue looking for the ring. When I arrived at my parents' house on Friday evening, I immediately noticed that Madison seemed different. Instead of the worried, supportive sister from the previous weekend, she was practically glowing with excitement. She kept checking her phone and giggling at messages, and when I asked what had her so happy, she just said that Jake was planning a big surprise for her soon. My stomach dropped. Something about her excitement felt wrong, given that we were supposedly still dealing with my missing ring crisis. I tried to focus on filling out the insurance forms with my parents, but I kept watching Madison out of the corner of my eye. She was acting like someone who had a wonderful secret, not like someone whose sister was going through a devastating loss. Later that evening, while Madison was in the shower, I noticed her laptop was open on the kitchen table. I was not trying to snoop, but when I glanced at the screen, my blood turned to ice. She had multiple browser tabs open, and one of them was clearly visible: how to resize vintage rings without damaging original setting. My hands started shaking as I stared at those words. When Madison came downstairs, I confronted her directly. I asked her point blank if she knew anything about my ring and if she had been researching ring resizing for any particular reason. She immediately became defensive, claiming she was just curious about jewelry in general, because Jake had mentioned wanting to learn about engagement rings. She turned it around on me, saying I was being paranoid and accusatory during an already stressful time. My parents overheard our heated discussion and came into the kitchen. When I explained what I had found on Madison's laptop, they immediately jumped to her defense. Dad said I was grasping at straws, and Mom suggested that maybe my stress about the missing ring was making me see connections that were not really there. They reminded me that Madison was just a young woman excited about her relationship, and that it was natural for her to research engagement rings when her boyfriend was showing interest. But I was not satisfied with their explanations. That night, I could not sleep, so I spent time scrolling through social media. When I checked Jake's Instagram profile, I found a photo from 3 days earlier that made my blood run cold. He had posted a picture of himself standing outside a jewelry store with the caption, "Big things coming soon," followed by a winking emoji. The timestamp showed it was posted the day after my ring went missing. When I showed this to my parents the next morning, along with Madison's browser history, they became angry with me instead of concerned. Dad accused me of cyberstalking and invasion of privacy, while Mom said I was letting jealousy cloud my judgment. They suggested that maybe I was upset that Madison might get engaged before my wedding, and that I was subconsciously looking for ways to sabotage her happiness. The conversation escalated when Madison finally broke down and admitted that she had taken my ring, but insisted it was just temporary. She claimed she only borrowed it so Jake could learn the right size for when he bought her own engagement ring. She swore that was the only reason, and that she had planned to put it back before I noticed it was gone. I was stunned by her casual admission of theft, but even more shocked by my parents' reaction. Instead of being horrified that Madison had stolen from me, they rallied around her. Mom said that Madison was younger and deserved a chance at happiness, and that since I already had Marcus's love and commitment, I should be willing to share and help my sister achieve the same thing. Dad added that Madison had just made a mistake out of desperation and love, and that I was being selfish by not understanding her perspective. He suggested that maybe I could just wait a little longer to get a new ring, and that family should always come first. The betrayal I felt from my entire family was overwhelming and heartbreaking. The confrontation ended with Madison tearfully confessing that she had already given my ring to Jake, and that he had used it to propose to her just 2 nights earlier at a family dinner that I had not attended. My parents had been there to witness and celebrate the engagement, and they had all agreed to keep it secret from me until they could figure out how to handle the situation. I stood in my childhood kitchen, staring at my family, unable to process what I was hearing. Madison was now wearing my grandmother's ring on her finger, the same ring that had been blessed by my grandparents' 60-year marriage, the same ring that Marcus had carefully chosen to symbolize our commitment. She had already posted engagement photos on social media, and extended family members and friends were commenting with congratulations. When I demanded that she give me my ring back immediately, Madison broke down crying and said it was too late. She explained that Jake had already announced their engagement to his family and coworkers, and that taking the ring back now would humiliate her and ruin their relationship. My parents supported her position, saying that what was done, and that forcing Madison to give back the ring would destroy her chance at happiness. They made me out to be the villain in this situation. Dad said I was being vindictive and cruel, while Mom accused me of not loving my sister enough to sacrifice for her happiness. They pointed out that I would be getting married soon anyway, and that I could always get a different ring, but Madison might never get another chance like this if I ruined things with Jake. I felt completely alone and abandoned by the people who were supposed to love and protect me. Marcus was back in Austin working, and I was facing this nightmare by myself. I packed my bags and left my parents' house that afternoon, with Madison still wearing my ring and my parents still defending her actions. During the drive back to Austin, I cried harder than I had ever cried in my adult life. The next week was a blur of pain and isolation. I could not bring myself to answer calls or texts from my family, and I avoided social media completely because I could not bear to see Madison's engagement photos with my ring. Marcus tried his best to comfort me, but even he struggled to understand how a family could treat one of their own children this way. Madison continued posting happy engagement content, tagging our parents and extended family members who showered her with love and congratulations. None of them knew the real story behind her ring, and watching everyone celebrate what I knew was built on theft and lies made me feel sick to my stomach. I started to doubt my own reality. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe family loyalty meant something different than I thought. Maybe I should just accept the situation and move on. But every time I looked at my empty ring finger, I felt the injustice burning in my chest like a physical pain. That is when I remembered something crucial about my grandmother's ring. When my grandfather had it made in 1943, he had requested a custom engraving inside the band. It was tiny and subtle, but it was there. E.R. and H.M. 1943, representing my grandmother Elizabeth Rose and my grandfather Harold Matthew, along with the year they got engaged. I realized that this engraving could be my proof, my way to verify what had really happened. I decided to call Muller's Fine Jewelry, the shop in my hometown, where my grandmother had taken her ring for maintenance and repairs over the years. Mr. Muller had known our family for decades, and he would remember working on such a distinctive vintage piece. When I called the store, Mr. Miller answered personally. I explained who I was and described my grandmother's ring in detail, mentioning the vintage setting and approximate date of creation. He immediately remembered the piece and confirmed that he had worked on it several times over the years for my grandmother and once more recently for sizing. Then, Mr. Muller mentioned something that changed everything. He said that just a few days earlier, a young man named Jake had brought in the same ring requesting that the original engraving be changed. Jake wanted the ER and HM 1943 inscription replaced with JK and M, along with a recent date. Mr. Muller had tried to explain the historical significance of the original engraving, but Jake insisted on the change, saying it was his ring now, and he wanted it personalized. Mr. Muller provided me with copies of the work order that Jake had signed along with photos of the ring that clearly showed my grandmother's distinctive setting. He also mentioned that Jake had seemed nervous and rushed paying in cash and insisting that the work be done immediately. Armed with this evidence, I knew I finally had the proof I needed to take action. I contacted a lawyer friend from college who specialized in family law, and she confirmed that what Madison and Jake had done constituted theft of an heirloom, and that the evidence I had gathered would be sufficient to press charges if necessary. I spent the rest of that week carefully planning my next move. I was not going to act on emotion this time. I was going to approach this strategically and make sure that justice was served. Marcus supported my plan completely and even offered to come with me for moral support when I confronted my family with the evidence. I called my parents and asked if I could come home for Sunday dinner to talk things through and hopefully find a way to move forward as a family. They seemed relieved that I was finally ready to be reasonable, as they put it, and eagerly agreed to the meeting. I did not tell them that Madison and Jake needed to be there too, but I made sure they understood this was important. That Sunday, I arrived at my parents' house with a folder of documents and a small recording device that my lawyer friend had suggested I bring. Marcus came with me for support, and we both tried to appear calm and conciliatory when we walked through the front door. Madison and Jake were both there, as I had hoped they would be. Madison was still wearing my ring, and she seemed nervous about seeing me. Jake appeared confident and somewhat smug, probably thinking that he had gotten away with his scheme. My parents were overly cheerful, clearly hoping that this dinner would resolve our family conflict once and for all. After we finished eating, I calmly told everyone that I had some information to share that would help clear up the situation with my ring. I started by placing the photos from Mr. Miller on the dining room table, showing the ring clearly in Jake's possession at the jewelry store. Madison went pale immediately, but Jake tried to act confused, claiming he did not understand what those photos were supposed to prove. Then I played the recording of my phone conversation with Mr. Miller, where he described in detail how Jake had brought in my grandmother's ring and requested that the original engraving be changed. The room fell completely silent as everyone listened to Mr. Miller explain the historical significance of the ring and how Jake had insisted on altering it despite the jeweler's advice. My parents stared at Madison and Jake in shock as the full scope of what had happened became clear. This was not just a sister borrowing a ring temporarily. This was a calculated theft with the intention of permanently altering and claiming someone else's family heirloom. Madison immediately broke down sobbing, but Jake became angry and defensive. He started blaming Madison, saying that taking the ring had been entirely her idea and that he had just gone along with it to make her happy. He claimed he had not understood the ring's significance and had only wanted to make the engraving more personal for their relationship. That is when I revealed the most damning piece of evidence. I showed them printouts of text messages between Jake and several local pawnshops where he had been inquiring about the value of vintage engagement rings and the best time to sell them for maximum profit. The timestamps showed that these conversations had taken place just days after his proposal to Madison. The room erupted into chaos. Madison screamed at Jake, finally realizing that his plan had been to sell my grandmother's ring after their honeymoon to pay off his credit card debts. Jake stormed out of the house, leaving Madison crying, and my parents sitting in stunned silence as they processed the magnitude of what had almost happened. My dad was the first to speak quietly, apologizing for not believing me earlier and for defending the wrong person. My mom reached across the table to hold my hand, tears streaming down her face, as she realized how badly they had failed me as parents. They had been so focused on protecting Madison that they had completely disregarded my rights and feelings. Madison slowly removed my ring and placed it on the table in front of me. She could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to apologize for everything she had done and for the pain she had caused our entire family. She admitted that she had known taking the ring was wrong, but she had been so desperate to get engaged before her friends moved on to the next phase of their lives. Over the next few hours, we had the most honest conversation our family had ever shared. My parents acknowledged that they had always enabled Madison's behavior and shown favoritism because she was younger. They realized that their protection of her had prevented her from learning important lessons about responsibility and consequences. I explained to them how betrayed and abandoned I had felt, not just by Madison's theft, but by their immediate assumption that I should sacrifice my happiness for hers. I told them that their reaction had been almost more hurtful than Madison's original actions, because it showed me that they did not value me equally as their daughter. Madison agreed to get counseling to understand why she had made such destructive choices, and she also committed to making amends not just with words, but with consistent actions over time. She acknowledged that rebuilding my trust would take years, not weeks, and that she had no right to expect immediate forgiveness. My parents apologized repeatedly and promised to examine their own patterns of favoritism and enabling behavior. They admitted that they had failed both of their daughters by not teaching Madison appropriate boundaries and by not protecting me when I needed them most. The healing process for our family was slow and difficult. I did not immediately forgive everyone and return to normal relationships. Instead, I insisted on family counseling sessions where we could work through these issues with professional guidance. I also established clear boundaries about what kinds of behavior I would and would not accept going forward. Marcus and I decided to postpone our spring wedding by several months to allow time for my family relationships to heal before such an important celebration. I wanted to be sure that when we did get married, it would be a joyful occasion shared with people who truly respected and supported us, not people who would sacrifice my well-being for someone else's convenience. Madison ended her relationship with Jake immediately after learning about his plan to sell the ring. She spent the following months focused on personal growth and building a career, rather than desperately seeking validation through romantic relationships. She also started volunteering with a local nonprofit that helped young women develop healthy relationship skills. My parents made genuine efforts to change their patterns of behavior and to treat both of their daughters with equal respect and consideration. They attended their own counseling sessions to understand how their favoritism had damaged our family dynamics, and they worked hard to rebuild trust with me through consistent actions over time. As for me, I learned invaluable lessons about self-worth and the importance of standing up for myself, even when facing opposition from the people I loved most. I discovered that setting boundaries did not mean I loved my family any less. It meant I loved myself enough to demand fair treatment from everyone in my life. When Marcus and I finally did get married 18 months later, I wore my grandmother's ring with pride and joy. The ring had been restored to its original condition with the proper engraving honoring my grandparents' legacy. As I walked down the aisle, I realized that the ring's true value was not in its diamonds or gold, but in the lesson it had taught me about knowing my own worth. 2 years after that terrible Sunday dinner confrontation, my relationship with Madison was slowly improving. She had proven through consistent actions that she was committed to being a better sister and a more responsible person. She never asked me to forget what had happened, but instead focused on earning my trust back through her behavior rather than her words. The experience taught me that sometimes the most important battles we fight are with the people we love most. Family bonds are precious, but they should never come at the cost of our own dignity and self-respect. True love and loyalty require mutual respect, and healthy relationships can only exist when everyone involved values each other equally. Standing up for myself when my own family betrayed me was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most important. It showed me that I had the strength to protect myself even when I felt completely alone, and it ultimately led to more honest and healthier relationships with everyone in my life. Sometimes, protecting what matters most to you means being willing to fight for it, even when the people opposing you are the ones who are supposed to love you unconditionally. My grandmother's ring taught me that lesson, and for that, I will always be grateful for its place in my life story. What would you have done if your own family betrayed your trust like this? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and standing up for yourself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and please hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about family relationships and finding the strength to advocate for yourself when it matters most. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that their worth is not negotiable, even with family. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you deserve to be treated with respect by everyone in your life, especially the people who claim to love you most.